Well, I'm sitting here with my friend, and also, in full disclosure, my congregant and sometimes student. I'm your student as well, at times, through your writings, Ana Levy-Lyons. It's so good to have you here, and it's really, really a privilege to be discussing your latest, right? Your latest work, which
Thank you.
I read voraciously, and I ate it up, and I think that others will as well. And we thought, and you in particular thought it would be great just to hear some of the writing that kind of gives a bit of a context that sets up this conversation. And I love that. I love having you read some of your words. So would you share some of the secret despair of the secular left, just to give us a start?
It's so nice to see you all. I'm so glad that you all came out in person to be here. It's such a rare and special treat. Embodied, right? Full presence of body, spirit, and all in one place. So thank you for being here. So I'm going to read from 3 parts of the book, and we're going to kind of go back and forth between reading and talking. But I wanted to start with this passage because it kind of sets up the context for the rest of the book. This is a section called What to Do with a Rosary. A friend of mine shared a story with me from her summer working as an intern chaplain at a hospital. On this particular day, she was working in the ER, and a patient was brought in who was freshly injured and very upset. He was belligerent, yelling and struggling. His wounds got treated, and eventually he calmed down enough that my friend could talk to him. She listened to his story, and as he told it, a great sadness fell over him. Finally, he said, "I know what I need. I need a rosary. I need to pray the rosary. Do you guys have a rosary here?" A rosary is a string of beads used as a Catholic prayer tool. The supplicant recites a particular prayer for each bead or set of beads and moves along the whole loop, cycling through several different prayers. I imagine that, as with most spiritual technologies, you have to do this a lot before it becomes second nature and you can really sink into it as a meditative devotional practice. So the patient wanted a rosary, and my friend knew that the chaplain's office did, in fact, have some plastic rosaries available. So she went in search of the rosary, found it, and returned a few minutes later and handed it to him. He took it and stared at her blankly. "Now what do I do?" he asked. The poor guy had to find out the hard way that the time to learn how to pray the rosary is not when you're in crisis, it's long before. My friend guessed that he had been raised Catholic but hadn't engaged with it for years, probably because it hadn't felt necessary and he preferred to spend his time in other ways. But a spiritual practice is an investment. And like any good investment, it starts small and its value grows over time. And then it's there when you need it. So many things are like this. Lifelong New Yorkers like to say that the best way to be able to afford an apartment in Manhattan is to have bought it 40 years ago. The best time to plant a tree is also 40 years ago. The best time to learn to play violin or speak Mandarin, long ago. We have to invest before we need it, whatever it is, the practice, the apartment, the tree, and before there's much payoff. The patient had not made that investment, and now he was bereft. Many of us these days, including me, are like that patient. Whether because of the distractions of modern life or negative experiences with our birth traditions, we were not able to get in at the ground floor and buy our stock early. So when trouble hits, as it inevitably does, we have a vague sense that there's something out there that could help and that something has something to do with religion and community and spirituality and tradition, but we don't know how to access it. We peer in through the window and we often give up and walk away. When I was a child, although my family was not religious, I was fascinated by the idea of religion. I visited churches and synagogues every weekend, pressing my nose against the glass. The assistant pastor at a local Presbyterian church offered to discuss the Bible with me. So I went every week, telling myself that I was just intellectually curious about this opiate of the masses. But underneath my cool remove was a yearning for the rituals, disciplines, practices, and mysteries of religious life. I was fascinated by the stories. I fantasized about becoming a nun. I imagined even that being a clergy person would be a great career for me. This kindly pastor's job seemed ideal. It was really too bad I didn't have a religion, I thought to myself. For years after that, my spiritual search went dormant. I flailed around in college with no real career ambitions. I eventually circled back to religious exploration through Eastern spirituality. I explored Buddhist meditation, traveled to India, became enamored with Hinduism through yoga and Hindu philosophy. Where previously I had thought of religious concerns as heady and ethereal, yogic practice presupposed a spiritual energy whose free flow or constriction manifested in the body. I was in my early 20s when I learned that I was Jewish. I heard an almost audible click as a puzzle piece fell into place. It made some sense of me to myself that I couldn't quite put a finger on. At the time, I didn't do much with the information, but just tucked it away. But as the years went by, I kept finding myself drawn to religious life, especially to synagogues and Jewish learning. I began to realize that I was heir to a gorgeous tradition of spiritual practices, rituals, music, and texts, dazzling in their breadth and depth. As I read and learned more, I fell in love with it. I found that as you drill down into any prayer, practice, or Hebrew word, it opens up like a geode into a cavernous, glowing space with layers of spiritual meanings and passageways to yet more gems. Far from the oppressive power that my peers felt it was, I began to think of Jewish tradition and ancient religious traditions generally as oases of nourishment and radical countercultural fire. Here were the antidotes to the pain of modernity right under our noses. Here were the bodily practices, the communal superglue, and the ecological teachings whose absence was sending us all into a global tailspin. My desire to live in the religious world as a clergy person came rushing back. The rabbinate seemed out of reach for the time being. Among other things, I didn't yet read Hebrew. As strangely familiar as Jewish spirituality felt, it also still felt foreign. I was like the ER patient who had asked for the Rosary but didn't know how to use it. So I joined Unitarian Universalism as a carpetbagger. In a way, it was a natural fit. This was the religified version of my upbringing. Creedless and ruleless, its principles were good, with lots of freedom to shape them as I pleased, and the people were kind and sincere. I studied, received my MDiv degree, and got ordained as a Yuyu minister. I began serving congregations in the Chicago area and then in New York City. Having not been a Yuyu before beginning this career, I learned on the job, and my Jewish journey continued apace. For years, I attended Jewish Renewal services on Saturday mornings with Rabbi David here at Romemu, and led UU services on Sunday mornings. To experience the contrast week after week was an invaluable education. With secular values earnestly cast as religious in the UU world, I got a rare window into the theology underpinning those values. It took years before I finally felt ready, but in 2020, I enrolled in rabbinical school part-time through the Jewish Renewal's Aleph ordination program. I simultaneously continued my career as a UU minister for 4 more years. The insights I gained through almost 2 decades living this odd double life animate this book.
Where to start with that? 'Cause that was a bit longer than I was expecting. And so I guess out of that, for those who don't know, Ana, that'll be a great way of introducing yourself and your background and what obviously animates the secret despair of the secular left. And if you do know Ana, also, you shouldn't be surprised by Ana's ability, your ability to say things that a lot of people have felt, but say it in a particular way that is very different than many have written about it before. So I want to ask you, what was the difference for you between the Saturday morning renewal service and the Sunday morning Yuyu service, in the sense that, I come from an Orthodox background and had my own religious awakening from being a bourgeois, upperly mobile, middle class, upper middle class, modern Orthodox compromised Jew in America into an ultra-Orthodox existence for about 5 or 6 years. And that then led me on a 10-year journey where I similarly was kind of rediscovered Jewish spirituality through the agency, the lens of Buddhism and Hinduism and other things. And when I started Romumu, many of the things that I had seen during my 10-year hiatus was what gave me the ability to go back in a trustworthy way and in a loving way to see the gems that you saw very clearly and still see very clearly. But I needed, because of my own wounding in that world, I needed the agency of Buddhism and others to kind of say, oh, we have it here too, and that's a good thing. And so did you feel that on a Saturday morning and renewal service or Romumu was somehow tapped in to the root tradition in a way that was more grounded or more, it connected back to that? What was the difference in your heart in those 4 years living that dual life? Or it was longer than that, because that was only since you became...
It was the whole
period, yeah.
I think one difference I think of as horizontal versus vertical, right? That Unitarian Universalism, like the left generally, is very good at kind of drawing from a wide range of different sources, right? And so there's a lot of wisdom in that, and there's a lot of connections in that, through all different kinds of traditions and philosophies and science. There was, in the kind of the way that they described their principles at the time, there were actually 7 sources of Unitarian Universalism, and some of them were world religions, and some of them were Jewish and Christian traditions, and science, and earth-based, right? So there's kind of there's a real, you get kind of a lot of what the world has generated, right? And in the Jewish world, and now I'm kind of unusual in that Jewish renewal was my first Judaism. Like that actually was my entry point to Judaism, which I think is not the case for most Jews.
Right.
Right. But in the Jewish world, what I was experiencing was more depth. Right. That there was this sense of depth through time. That it connected. It was an ancient tradition that had been kind of layered and layered and layered upon. And then with a sense of connection both to that history and to the future. So that's one way that I would characterize the difference. I think that the Yuyu and secular world is very freedom-oriented and individualistic. Like there's a great deal of pride in charting one's own course. And I found that the Jewish world was more obligation-oriented. The mitzvot, the commandments, and living a life that's kind of guided by those, the webs of obligation.
Webs of obligation.
Yeah.
So can you take us back, though? Because in this introduction, you really, the despair that is the secret despair of the secular left, which, of course, now the secret's out.
The secret's out.
Like, you've told everybody.
Nobody knew there was despair in our world.
There's no despair, and now it's secular left is like, wow, I didn't know.
Right.
But you knew. So before you discovered, right? You. No, but I mean it. No, I just also mean it like that you experienced the despair in some sense. Like when you you had already dabbled in other careers, right? I think you were in high tech at some point, and you were a musician.
Yep.
Right? You've done a number of things,
Yeah.
and the answers, you say that there were answers in the wisdom traditions that spoke to you, that you knew this grief, you knew this dislocation.
Yeah.
Right? And so
so
walk us through that. So Yuyu was an answer for you at that moment, but then you realized that for you, the Yuyu worldview was already infected by or impacted by some of the lenses and philosophies that were the thing that leads to despair in some sense, some of the unmoored? What was this process for you?
I mean, the despair that I've sensed is just in the secular left world in general. And it's certainly not specific to Yuyus.
No,
right?
no.
This is like, but
Certainly
so
not.
all the worlds that I moved through, I was working in the .com boom in San Francisco in the 90s, and I was a musician, singer-songwriter, and I was into rock climbing, and there was all, I was like fully living a secular, like pretty happy life, right? And but I think that over time, this longing that I had had from the time that I was a kid was never met by any of those kinds of pleasures and powers that I could have, as a secular person, being successful in this or that or the other thing, right? That there was something that was missing, and I looked around like over the years. It's not like there was one moment, but I looked around over the years and realized, you know what? This is not just me.
Right.
Like, this is everybody. And like now, it's becoming really clear when you look at the world that we're in, and the depression and the anxiety and people, passive consumers staring at screens all day, and ecological devastation, and all
Plastic water bottles.
Plastic water bottles. I mean, even right, like.
Metaphysical blues.
No, I mean, it's like it's becoming clear to everybody that like it's not working. Like what we're doing is not working, right? And that there's a lot of despair, and it's not secret.
Right.
But the question is like, what's the cause of it?
Right. But what the cause of it is the secret, in a sense. The cause of it is that it's if you're a secular left who doesn't really have a religious or spiritual tradition, then you might not have the diagnostic tool to actually name what the source of the despair might be.
That's part of it. But I think the concept of the secret despair is that I think people in my experience, like secular modern people, don't want to admit that it's not working because like we're proud. I'm not going to say they, I'm going to say we are like proud of the kind of freedoms and the capacities that we have. Right, so like for example, we left the homes of our birth and we started kind of spreading out all over the country and all over the world, and then we developed technologies that would allow us to stay connected with each other. And isn't that great? So now we really don't have to stay home. Now we can go out and like live wherever we want to, work wherever we want to, and we can still be connected. It's just as good, right? And then we're finding that actually now that we all live, spread out all over the world and we live our lives on screens, we're actually really lonely and anxious. And we're miserable with this great thing that we've created for ourselves. But like, who wants to admit that? Because like, what are you going to do? Like, you can't sort of undo. I mean, I believe that you can, but like the genie's out of the bottle, and it's really hard to kind of undo that once you. So
I want to get to your prescription after you've diagnosed this, but when you speak about this missing piece, and the first thing that came to mind was I was thinking of a phrase that I heard from John Bradshaw about metaphysical blues, like the sense that there's something missing. And when you said something's missing, it also reminded me of Jürgen Habermas, the great German philosopher, wrote that religion is an awareness of what is missing, that something is missing. And that lack, right, that is kind of almost a soul lack, you felt immediately, or you felt it in a very immediate way. And then it led you, back to the fascination you had with religious tradition, with wisdom. And so in the book, you identify three major trends, right? These three basic things that are part of what is leading to this despair. And you just described one of them, which is, right, dislocation.
Yeah.
a sense of disconnection and a sense of disembodiment. And
Yeah.
to that, you name those things. Would you share some of the architecture of your...
Yeah. So I kind of, in the book, I trace these three, I think of them as kind of concentric circles of our reality, our material reality. And I use the Hebrew words for them because they don't have exact translations in English, and I like the Hebrew words. So one is the word nefesh, which is our body-soul composite. It's our self, right? Would you say that's an accurate understanding of nefesh?
Well, you already wrote, you didn't ask me before you put it in the book.
No, that's true, I didn't.
It is.
Yeah.
It's great.
It's right. So it's the whole, right? Because the ancient Hebrews didn't sort of experience, at least as I read it, didn't experience a separation between body and soul the way that we have in modernity. So nefesh, our body, self, which is people, like a people, a family, a community, and Adama, which means earth. And the nuance of Adama is that Adam, is an earthling that comes from the earth, right? So all three of these are kind of nested layers of materiality and life. You know, our nefesh, our body, is within the a people, which is within the Adama, the earth. And those, in the way that I think about it, those three are the way that God manifests in this world. Like, those are the ways that we experience God. Like, there's no kind of, well, I won't say there's no other way, but that's the primary way that we in our human incarnation, like on this earth, like these are the ways, through our bodies, through our communities, and through the earth that we're all part of. Like, these are our access points to the divine, like as human beings. And so when we become disembodied, disconnected, and dislocated, we're actually cutting off our kind of broadband connection with God.
So walk us through how we're disconnecting from each of them. I mean, you did a little bit with the dislocation.
Yeah.
But just
Yeah.
if you could, just walk, like, your diagnosis.
Yeah.
Disembodied is kind of counterintuitive to some of the progressive, values or various structures that are superimposed on each of these coordinates in a way, or they could be, if they're walked out.
Yeah. Well, I think the way that probably everybody in this room experiences disembodiment on a daily basis is when we get on a Zoom call with somebody else, right? I mean, we take that so for granted, but actually when we're on a Zoom call with somebody else, we're in this kind of sort of imagined or felt mutual space, right? And then our bodies are each somewhere else. So within each one of us, there's this split between kind of where our sense of self is and where our body is. And we do that to ourselves all the time. And I think that there's grief in that we don't even notice because it's so normal now. It's so normal. Do you think I should go into that story about the nefesh flying back and forth?
Sure.
Yeah. So I learned this. I learned this thing about why it is that Jews cover the mirrors during a shiva. This is a Jewish tradition. During a shiva, after somebody dies, we cover the mirrors in our home. And a teacher told me that the reason for that, or a sort of mystical reason for that, is that when a person dies, for the very first time, their soul is separating from their body. And so the body is in the grave, and the soul still sort of imagines itself in the home where the Shiva is taking place. And so the soul is flying back and forth in distress between the body and the home, because for the first time it's been separated, right? And so the reason to cover the mirrors is that you don't want the soul to experience the distress of looking in a mirror and seeing that it has no body.
It doesn't explain how the soul sees without eyes, but it does. There's definitely, the Talmud says, the thing that is seen, the thing that sees is now, right?
Yeah.
Davar shenirah shelo, like it's like the seeing is now not seen, right? That kind of thing, yeah.
So that thing that the rabbis kind of imagined was like so painful for the soul, like flying back and forth, like where am I, happening for the first time ever. Like we do that to ourselves all the time now. Right.
It's a bit amazing, like just to think about it, if we stop for a second, it's actually an upgrade on voice projection. Like until we had the visual ability to see the body of someone, we just had their disembodied voice coming through through phone lines that are somewhere in the ocean. But I do, so that sense of the dislocation may be that a body, that there's shared space, but without shared physical space, which is itself fascinating. So that's...
I think, phone does this to an extent, but I think there's something especially confusing about having the image.
Right, well. Even more so, because it's not, I agree with you. I agree with you. But it's also ironic given that in many progressive worldviews, the movement from concrete to abstraction more broadly is really what enabled what we call civilization to be created in some sense. The movement from a concrete symbol that represented, the representation, to language that could represent a vast number of things under one heading, like tree, not that particular tree, but all trees or whatever wood might be. So we've reached the height of abstraction, or the apotheosis of abstraction, and now we're it's killing us. Abstraction is killing us, right?
Well, rabbinic Judaism itself emerged from exactly this.
Exactly.
Right?
The paradigm shift,
So is there some tipping point where we just become completely disembodied? I feel like maybe, yes, like this is kind of where we're at. AI, I mean, it's like this is the way that it's going.
And so in each of them, so they're all interrelated. So the disconnection to, of course, disembodied, and disconnection,
from the earth, right? Like we don't have, when you're online, it doesn't matter like where you are on the earth, right? And so kind of it misteaches us about the nature of reality, right? Because when you're online, you can delete things and they just actually disappear. You can move things around, right? Where you could never do that in real life. And it doesn't matter where you are. And actually, in real life, ecosystems, the particular local ecosystem where you are, it matters a lot. Right.
So are there secular answers to these three problems, or is secularism itself the culprit for the crisis, the spiritual crisis that you name? And second question, which is, many will claim that religion is actually what brought us to this as well, kind of like to go to religion as an answer to this, or to spiritual traditions, is to, in some way, deny their role in bringing us to this point. Religion and the earth, for example, the way, religious sanctioning of the way that we use the earth's resources, because human beings are kind of androcentrism, like we're at the center of everything, and religion will give you that imprimatur, like, oh, it's all about human beings and God gave it to us. So did secularism have an answer that you just think just falls short, and does religion deny, have rose-colored glasses about religion's ability to answer these problems?
I fully admit that I probably idealize kind of religious traditions, because in the same way that somebody who is raised in orthodoxy might idealize the freedom of secularism, like me being raised in secularism and living in secularism for so long, it just seems like, you always kind of, the grass is always greener, right? So I don't pretend to be objective about that. But I guess I think that secularism probably won't be able to solve these problems, because the sort of primal gesture of secularism is a centrifugal force, right? It's kind of it's a freedom force. It's an outward motion. And I think that's kind of energetically what's kind of spinning us out into like like individual atoms, right? And pushing us away from, I think technology, like our internet technologies are a centrifugal force, even though they claim to be the opposite, right? And so I think that what we actually need is a centripetal force, like pulling us back in toward the center, toward the earth, toward our communities, toward our own bodies. And that's, at least historically, been kind of the energetic direction of religious traditions.
I think now's a good time maybe for you to do a second reading. Do you
All
have
right.
that?
Sure.
We'll go from there, kind of.
For their preschool year, my children went to a Jewish day school in Manhattan. Oh, you know what? I should explain something before I start this. So this chapter is called The Secular Gaze, and this comes from the idea of the male gaze, right? You're familiar with that, right? Where it's that women are constructed through the eyes of men in a particular way, and that it's the male framing that kind of informs how we understand women and how we understand life in general. So I'm talking about the secular gaze here, which is the secular framing that we all kind of live in, whether we are even aware of it or not. For their preschool year, my children went to a Jewish day school in Manhattan. They loved it, and we, their parents, loved it. I was amazed at how the children were reading and writing in English and Hebrew, as well as learning about Torah stories and holidays. At this school, it was assumed that all the families kept Shabbat, a time focused on gratitude for all that we have and are. Children would help bake challah on Fridays and get out of school early so their families could get ready for the holiday. I was especially moved by how these 4-year-olds and their teachers would talk in depth about Jewish values. I remember once hearing a conversation about poverty in which, in addition to a lesson about tzedakah, justice, charity, the children were asked to discuss the difference between their wants and their needs. My daughter, Miriam, later used the framework she had learned in that conversation in a real-life situation, where she explained that she wanted something, but also volunteered that she did not need it. For financial reasons, the following year, we decided to enroll the children in the local public elementary school. It was considered one of the best elementary schools in the city. It was right in our neighborhood, and it was free. They've continued in the New York City public school system ever since, and we've found much to appreciate about it. Values, however, are meant to be handled on our own time. An exception to this rule is the teaching of values around multiculturalism and sexual and gender diversity, which are considered non-controversial, neutral values in the liberal milieus of our children's schools. There is no special regard for the religious observances of the few students who have them. Religion is treated like a hobby or a sport or other extracurricular activity, something appended to normal life, which is secular. A case in point, when Miriam started middle school, we were delighted to discover that there were a variety of after-school activities the students could choose to do. She wanted to try debate, which was a club and everyday activity that I had enjoyed as a teen. We read the information, it met once a week after school, and it looked just right for her. We signed her up for it, and she began it. All was well until we received an email letting us know that debate competitions would be taking place on Saturdays, in other words, Shabbat, on Zoom. The email assured us that the competitions were optional. This immediately precipitated a conflict in our family. We're committed to a Shabbat practice of non-striving, enjoying the abundance of all we already have. Each week, for the 25 hours of the holiday, we aspire to enter a timeless, non-competitive state, without alarms, screens, to-do lists, in which we can be together, be in nature as much as our urban existence allows, and rest in the faith that we've done enough for the week. Even though it would not be work in the conventional sense, a debate competition felt antithetical to the spirit of Shabbat that we were cultivating. But understandably, Miriam did not want to be left out of what we now understood was an important component of the debate program. All of her peers would be doing it. Besides, she argued, she wanted to debate in these competitions and would enjoy doing it. This would not feel like work. Shouldn't Shabbat be about doing what we want? Here, the unassailable secular logic had crept into our Jewish family life. I know that the debate competition is what you want, I wanted to say, but Shabbat is what you need. I knew this reasoning would fall flat. The religious perspective that my husband and I offered felt frail and isolated, surrounded on all sides by society's towering confidence in freedom, choice, and the fulfillment of individual desires. Declaring the competitions to be optional exonerated the public school from any responsibility for impinging on religious freedom. The state has no interest in what a child or family decides as long as there's no direct coercion involved. But here too, this administrative neutrality masks an overpowering gravitational pull toward the secular worldview. The peer pressure for young people is intense, as everyone knows, and adult role models in the faculty often show their anti-religious biases as well. When my daughter talked with her debate teacher about the Shabbat issue, rather than showing support for her family's religious commitments, the teacher commiserated with her, saying, "That really stinks." And so the battle lines get drawn. The state, in this case represented by the public school, formally accommodates religious practice by making Saturday debates optional, and so becomes the nice parent, offering the kids whatever they want. The family and the religion become the mean parent, offering something that by contrast feels austere and parsimonious. At our kids' Jewish day school, of course, Shabbat felt anything but austere and parsimonious. It was joyful and fun. It was a time everyone looked forward to. But now a shadow had been cast over the practice of Shabbat. And once this happens, in my experience, there's no going back. The secular world has triumphed simply by planting a seed of resentment in the child.
So yet again, I'm speechless to a degree after reading it, listening to you reading it, but I can't help but walk away from that incredible story and the way that you tell it without just wondering, what would be the solution to that? I mean, isn't the secular, I'm familiar with the secular gaze, and I actually think it's even more pervasive in America for Jews. I know that we're not speaking about Jews per se, but as a rabbi and in a Jewish institution, and in a Jewish story, we're in the non-Jewish gaze is even more profound than the secular gaze, the Christian gaze, right, and so on. But like, aren't the principles that animate secularism structured in a way to avoid, deeply avoid, creating a society where one narrative or one practice would be the fundamental practice? I mean, is there any way to construct a public school system where secularism or freedom of religion were not at the center, which would by definition,
Right.
I mean, if you want to go to a hockey-based school, they'll play hockey. Otherwise, it'll be a hobby in your public school, right? It's like, is there any other, like, I understand the critique more broadly, but in the public school, I mean, I take from that story is that God, I wish that you could have kept your kids in a Jewish day school.
Right.
Right. I wish that it
Yeah.
would have been affordable for you to keep your kids
Right.
in a Jewish day
Right,
school.
which it wasn't. So that's a structural
Right.
thing, right?
And so you have to choose now between affordable,
Yeah.
good education and
Yeah.
being the bad parent to your
Yeah.
kids' Saturday, hobbies.
I mean, I don't have a specific answer for how public schools could do that, except to say that they won't do any activities on weekends to sort of, let everybody's observances,
Right. That would
happen
be.
without pressure.
Yeah.
But I think what interests me in this story is how the secular framework is so invisible, right? How it poses as just neutral. Like, no, you don't have to do it on Saturdays, it's optional.
Right.
Right? And so the immense pressure and that like gravitational pull toward the secular worldview is kind of, immediately after this section, I talk about this concept called the third framework, that basically like once a child is taken from a religious worldview, and then a secular worldview kind of presents itself as an alternative, right? Then you have two competing worldviews, right? The child is no longer like inside the religious worldviews. Now you have two competing worldviews, and so whenever you have two competing frameworks like that, there has to be kind of a third framework that comes in to kind of adjudicate between the two, right? So, and what is that third framework? Well, it's usually something about, what you want, what's going to be more freedom, what's going to be healthy according to modern psychology, what's going to be kind of reasonable, kind of middle ground, right? Which sounds really a lot like the secular framework, right? So it's just the secular framework kind of recapitulated, right? And that's invisible to people.
What's interesting to me listening to, and after reading the book too, and just listening to you now articulating it, is that a bit of a paradox. I wonder if the only way a thick worldview works is if it's actually out of you. Worldviews need to be out of you. And there's some kind of, the secret despair and the secret worldview are kind of like, what's animating so much of the book and the conversation is, waking up to the water in which you're swimming, kind of using David Foster Wallace's famous image, and in other traditions too, he took it from there, that we're something that becomes so rote and so common and it's so under the radar that it's, you're swimming in it and you're not even aware that it's water. The fish don't even aware that it's water. But if you grow up in a religious worldview, when you speak to people who kind of came out from living under a religious worldview, they say like, oh, the secular worldview came to make me aware of how insidious the religious worldview was. I didn't even realize that I had these options or these freedoms, right? And so to some degree, when we make these worldviews visible, I still wonder if they can still do the work, which is, like, is the genie out of the bottle once you are aware of the worldview you're in? It kind of gives you freedom, but it also, disenchantment can also creep in, no?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think to me, one of the beautiful things about a religious tradition, like one of the ways that I've been able to kind of see the water that we're swimming in is by kind of delving into a religious tradition, right? Like it provides an outside to what would otherwise be your whole world. And yeah, of course, that's true the other way around too, right? You're inside a religious worldview, and the secular world can provide an outside for it. But so I mean, to me, the whole that's, if anything, the purpose of this book is to try to help people and my own processing of how do you get outside of something that we're so embedded and that we don't even see it.
So walk us through some of for you, ritual and other elements of the sacred are almost an antidote, right, to all these things. And so Shabbat, what other practices are those that can heal dislocation, disconnection, right, and disembodiment?
Yeah. I mean, Shabbat is a big one. I think saying blessings before meals, saying blessings in general, a kind of mindfulness practice of kind of where does all this stuff come from that we're just kind of using mindlessly. The holiday cycle, I think, is really, really powerful. I've had some of the most powerful experiences of my life on Yom Kippur in your synagogue. There's a sense that there's a wisdom to a holiday cycle connected to the seasons of the earth that are that allow us to keep spiraling back to our places of stuckness, right? And spiraling, hopefully, because you're not like coming back to exactly the same place where you were before, but you're kind of revisiting, because we all kind of struggle with the same things year after year, and the same things that ancient people struggled with. We have our new versions of those things, but I think being able to tap into the experience of thousands of years of people wrestling with God and with their own like places of constriction and histories and collective history and individual history, to have kind of a framework, a pathway through is, I think, a powerful thing.
When you become a rabbi, is there going to be Zoom services in your synagogue?
No way.
No way, right? Like even today, no online. We're not being live streamed,
That's
right?
Yeah.
We want people to be here, be present.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't think I'm going to be that kind of rabbi.
Oh, a different kind of rabbi?
No, I'm not going to be a congregational rabbi. I think.
Smart choice. Very smart.
Yeah. I thought you'd approve.
I approve of that. Oh my gosh, more time with your family, more time. Okay.
Yeah.
But there's something here also that I just wanted to name, which is, I think that people might not catch this, but I know that there were times in my spiritual seeking, and I very much identified as a seeker, that I was certainly guilty of being a bit of a dilettante. I dabbled here, I dabbled there. I was gathering, perennial wisdom or perennial philosophies, and there's something in that which is, of course, not wanting to take in the totality of a tradition, because often traditions have patriarchy and misogyny, and texts of terrorists, Phyllis Treble called them, it's just like all kinds of bathwater along with the baby.
Yeah.
And I almost always thought that what I was doing was kind of teasing out what was really kosher, what was nourishing, but I also found that it was a way of reifying an element of the secular worldview that was insidious too, also secret, which was the constant sense that I was superior to these ancient texts, that I was almost brought my a certain a glibness, like, oh, look at this old, they could use a little bit of me helping polish these texts, right? I'm bringing my modernity, I've read Foucault, I'm gonna save this text, right? Or I'm just gonna ignore it. And Thich Nhat Hanh, I'll just read only Thich Nhat Hanh, Vietnamese Buddhist monk. Everything he said was perfect because Buddhism is the best. So I think that there was a second piece of that was not just the hubris, but also the consumerist too, right? The kind of like playlist, I'll curate my synagogue to have the best of all of it. And I think that without being critical, of course, of Yuyu, it's been an incredible tradition, and you served those communities for close to 2 decades. But there was something of that approach which you find lacking in a way for the depth that a lot of people are seeking.
Yeah.
That's
true, although I don't think that's unique to Yuyu.
No,
as you said, that was you, and I think that
well.
I think
Yuyu
that a lot of religious a lot of religious communities struggle with that sort of consumerist approach and that exact kind of hubris. But you said it exactly. Like we think that we know better, and that we only have stuff to teach that ancient tradition. We don't have anything to learn from it. And And we're leaving a lot on the table when we do that. Which isn't to say that it's not a beautiful thing to draw from other traditions. I do yoga and I meditate drawing from other, different kinds of traditions. But yeah, there is something about approaching an ancient tradition with the humility of saying, you know what, like, there may be things that I know that they didn't know back then, but there's probably things that they knew that I don't know.
And the three pieces of your diagnosis, the disconnection, the disembodiment, and dislocation, certainly in your own personal narrative, not just looking at this writ large as a societal issue, your reclamation of your Jewish self and the Jewish wisdom in our tradition is really inspirational for me and for many who know you. And could you share, maybe like putting you on the spot, but like a piece of wisdom or a text that really, when you read it, you said, "Oh, wow, I wish I'd known this text," or "This text really makes me so, proud to be Jewish," or "This tradition or this lineage is so remarkable."
Well, I wrote a whole book on the Ten Commandments, and delving into those commandments, I was just amazed at how radical they are, spiritually, politically. Even the very beginning, I am, whatever you want to call it, it's
the Lord your God.
The Lord.
Lord.
The word Lord is this stand-in for this word that means it's the verb to be. It's being itself. So I am reality. I am being itself. Your God. Stop right there. Right?
Power.
Stop right there. Like the transcendent, the most abstract, right? That is actually my God. Right? Like the transcendent is the immanent. Like right there in the very beginning of the Ten Commandments, you shall have no other gods before me. Right? If we lived our lives by that, like putting that like power of reality itself, then it goes on to say that I brought you out of Egypt from slavery, right? Like that power of liberation at the center of our lives, and to not worship any other God than that. It's kind of like, what more do you need?
I'm joining your non-synagogue. Jewish wisdom also, often people think of Jewish wisdom specifically in the realm of, at the end of life wisdom, and kind of the overarching Jewish value of life didn't mean that death was treated with fear or with contamination, meaning, in the temple period, it could contaminate to come into contact with death, but still, if you were a priest, you were to come into contact with death, especially with loved ones, with relatives, a husband, a wife, a father, a mother. Mm-hmm. And the tradition gave rituals and wisdom on how to interact in moments where, in the secular world, one can be left completely without any guide, like not knowing what to do. And you have a story. I think is it the third reading that you were going to offer? Okay,
yeah.
There's a story in your book that really hit me in the gut when you wrote it and when I read it.
Yeah, I will share that. Do we have to stop right at 9? Because we're...
No, I'm aware.
Okay.
It's like a service. Right. I'm like, Elena is in 10 minutes, and I know.
All right. All right. Early in my ministry, when I was serving a Unitarian Universalist congregation in the Midwest, I was called for an urgent pastoral visit with a congregant, Clara, whose husband had suffered a cardiac arrest the night before. When I arrived at the hospital, he was unconscious and intubated, and I sat with Clara in the visitor lounge. Pale and shuddering, she caught me up on everything that had happened. The doctors had done everything they could, but her husband had no realistic chance of recovery. The decision had been made to take him off life support. She was in shock, but she understood and accepted this decision. Then she said something that has haunted me all the years since. I'm not supposed to be in his room when it happens. She explained that the doctors had told her that once they pulled the plug, it might well take some time for him to die, and it would be too hard to watch. So she shouldn't be there. And they assured her that he was not aware of anything anyway. I was appalled by this advice, and equally appalled that she was ready to take it. But I immediately saw that I had no authority in this domain. As a Yuyu minister, I represented a movement without a shared code of religious practices and without traditions around death and dying. There were no obligations of care to point to, no theology of a soul's journey, no collective faith in a consciousness that transcends the brain, which in this man's case had flatlined. I had no religious grounds on which to tell Clara that she ought to be with her husband, holding his hand as he dies. That was simply my personal opinion, which I had not been invited to share. And so I fell back in my professional role on a principle that I knew did have weight in the secular ethic, that of personal choice and rights. I reminded Clara that whether or not to be in her husband's room was her decision to make, not the doctor's. I asked her what she wanted. Did she want to be with him when he died? She seemed confused and distressed by this question and the subtle implied nudge. I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, they're the experts. They're probably right. It probably would be too hard to watch. Watching her quavering uncertainty, her groping for guidance, I was struck by how little Clara had to fall back on. Neither the external structure of religious tradition nor the internal compass calibrated through religious practice. I held back the next question that was on the tip of my tongue. What do you think he would want? Instead, I offered her an alternative that, to my thinking, was a distant second best. Would you like me to go in and sit with him? She nodded and burst into tears of gratitude and relief. And so it was that Clara went home, and I ended up sitting by the bedside, holding the hand of a complete stranger as he gradually died over the next several hours. The nurses came in periodically to check on us and gave him increasing doses of morphine, ostensibly for the pain, but clearly also to move the process along. When he died, I was struck anew at how palpably, unmistakably different a dead man is from an unconscious one. I left the hospital, called Clara, and let her know. I was glad I had been able to help Clara in the moment, but I also felt deflated, sad for her and for her husband, and sad for this lonely, confused world we've built. Clara had substituted a professional service, mine, for what could have been her private final gift to her husband. She may or may not have been spared guilt in his last hours, but I fear that her grief was ultimately amplified. Her overflowing gratitude at my offer to sit with him revealed what was true in her heart, that she knew he shouldn't die alone, despite what the doctors said. She probably also knew that he shouldn't die with a stranger who was essentially paid to be there. But as a secular liberal, she had no spiritual framework for the significance of this moment, no traditions to hold her up, no mythic stories to mirror her own. In me, her minister, she had plenty of support to do what she wanted to do, but no support to do the right, though hard, thing.
I mean, so much of what we've been talking about for the last hour is already in that story.
Yeah.
On so many levels. The secular worldview, the inability to say to someone, this is what is the right thing to do. There's no framework for that. Mm-hmm. The overindulgence in personal rights and desires and wants. Mm-hmm. And a vacuum, ostensibly. And even for you, as someone who is a minister, right, to be paid, like the paid stranger without any framework is
right.
really...
I didn't know this guy.
You had no idea who he was. And do you imagine now that, as a rabbi, do you look back and think, I should have pushed this person because I was a person of cloth? Or was it also like an indictment of maybe not having a full agreed upon ritual structure, maybe in Yuyu where it was, but it's bigger for you. It was much, much bigger. It's about
Yeah, I mean, there were no
story.
resources that she could draw from. There were no resources that I, as the
could draw
clergy
from.
person, could draw from.
Right.
A friend suggested recently that maybe I could have said, I think you'll feel better if you go sit with him. And maybe I probably should have. I should have tried that.
Maybe.
It didn't occur to me. But
that too would have brought into the same structure, right? The same
it would have,
structure
but maybe it would have gotten her
might have been
to
effective,
do it.
right?
Although the doctors were so adamant, like she would have had to, like they were even reluctant to let me go sit with him. Like she would have had to very strongly say, like, I'm going to go sit with him, and I didn't see her, doing
But this also comes back to for me, very viscerally to the disembodied piece.
Yes.
Because it's also, in birthing, and, I know that,
Yeah.
I remember my wife and I thinking about natural birth and natural childbirth, not to say that we should never have medicine, never have, hospitals, but the whole business of birthing and anything embodied, anything messy, anything,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
Hospitals are so focused on, not on healing, but on sick places, being sick.
The messiness and the doctors were saying, he's not conscious. His brain is not right, and therefore he's not, there is no consciousness. He's not aware. He's not there, right? Like that's the ethic that like if your mind isn't there, then you are not there. But there's in my way of thinking, and I think in a Jewish or religious way of thinking, like there isn't that bright line between the body and the, it's not like the person just vacates the body just like that.
No.
It's like a really important part of who her husband was there. And, yes, there's a, consciousness that transcends the body, but the body is sacred. And her husband was there in this, going through a huge transition. Right.
Is it possible, I have now 20 years experience trying, we were talking about this earlier, trying to build a deeply thick Jewish community that is rooted in the religious tradition that I was brought up in and that I studied, but attracts, I would say, people who are very, very much within the secular worldview, in the secular gaze, and even those who know it and actually still revel in it. It's not just that they become aware of the secular gaze. Without the secular gaze, to some extent, or the secular perspective and prism, many of them wouldn't be showing up in my synagogue, right? Because it's only because they imagine that, the synagogue has been tempered by, secularism, tempered by these values.
Yes.
Is it possible to create a thick, bought-in spiritual community, religious community that is rooted in these old paradigms with the upgrades? Because I think this has been a bit of a paradox, a koan riddle that we've been trying to figure out here in America for a long time.
Yeah.
I wonder, what do you think?
I mean, I think Romemu is as close to that as exists. I mean, as far as I know, but the tension is real, right? Like because again, it's the centripetal force and the centrifugal force, right? There's this tension always pulling between kind of tradition, which can feel really constrictive to people and does in fact have real issues, the patriarchy and all of that, right? And then, but you go too far the other direction and you have you lose the thread and you lose the, the actual like substance of it.
Yeah.
And so it's like finding that space is, it's really complicated, and I think you're doing an amazing job. Like I really like it.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, you're a long way from peering into the windows in the Presbyterian Church or going for Bible classes. You've come a long way,
so.
many lifetimes, and now you're kind of giving, essentially doing such a gift, I think, to disclose the secular despair and kind of want to name it in a profound way.
Yeah.
What are your hopes for this book? Where do you want it to go?
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. Like my hope is that this will help. I'm hoping that people who read this book will do in their own lives what I did in this book. Like, look at the stories of our own lives and kind of interpret them through this lens of, the things, are the things that are making us unhappy really the things that are making us unhappy? Or is it actually like, do you have to go several layers deeper to see kind of, our alienation versus our connection from our bodies, our communities, Earth, right? Like there's all of those things kind of get woven through all of the stories of our lives. And so if this book helped people kind of have a tool or like, a framework for sort of re-understanding or understanding differently our own stories, I think that would be a support.
Yeah, I would love to see it make its way into like, Sam Harris or one of the atheists and have a big conversation about the impact of secularism.
I'll leave that conversation to you. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm hoping that those of you who are here tonight will actually, in the flesh, the embodied, full-on, incarnated individuals who are here in our midst, on your way out after coming to say hello to Ana, you'll purchase an actual physical, not a Kindle, a physical book. We have a book stand right outside, and for those of you who are here to purchase a book, and hopefully you'll tell your friends about it. I'm telling everybody around, and I told you that I was carrying it around for a while when I was reading it and marking it up, and everybody was kind of drawn in by the title, and then when they opened it, they said, oh, this makes sense, this makes sense. Oh, this names something for me. And I think one of the great gifts that this book presents to people is giving language for what many people have been struggling with and feeling in their own way. And I think your diagnosis and also your descriptions are remarkably accurate and eloquent. And so I want to thank you, and I think all of us want to thank you for doing that, Ana. So really great job.
Thank you so much.
I think in a past life you wanted to be a rock star. In your previous, I think I read that somewhere or listened to it. So I think you're a rock star. I think you're gonna. I think that you are really preternaturally gifted at spiritual language and frames and religious language. So just thank you for being here. Thank you to everybody for coming out tonight. Thank you to the Bronfman Center for putting this on this evening, to Jacob Nurek, and to Carly Brooklyn here, and also to all of the AV people here. We thank you in security, and we hope that everybody has a safe night. Buy a book, everybody, on the way out. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Amazing.